When 8-year-old Leo found himself trapped in the passenger seat of a grimy work van, the world outside the window seemed to move in a blurry, uncaring haze. The man beside him smelled of stale cigarettes and something sour that made Leo's stomach clench. He knew, with the simple, gut-wrenching certainty of a child, that this man was not taking him home. Then, at a long red light, a miracle rumbled up beside them. It was a man on a motorcycle, vast and solid in black leather, his presence a stark contrast to the flimsy hope Leo was clinging to. In a moment of pure, unthinking desperation, Leo reached his small, trembling hand out the window and laid it on the biker's glove. That single, silent touch was a scream for help, and it was a scream that Frank "Sticks" Kowalski heard loud and clear. The biker's instincts, honed by years of service, flared to life, and his decision to answer that silent plea set off a chain of events that would turn a routine Tuesday afternoon into a high-speed chase for a child's life. The asphalt of the intersection shimmered under the oppressive weight of the mid-August sun. It was a day like any other in the sleepy suburban town, a day of errands and lawnmowers and the distant drone of cicadas. Traffic was light, a collection of minivans, sedans, and work trucks idling patiently, their air conditioners fighting a losing battle against the heat. To anyone else, it was just another red light on another Tuesday. But for Frank Kowalski, it was the moment his world tilted on its axis. Sticks, as he was known to his brothers in the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club, sat astride his Harley-Davidson, the familiar, deep-throated rumble of the engine, a comforting vibration that ran up through his boots and into his bones. At 42, he was a man carved from hard experience. His road name wasn't a nod to a musical past. It was a relic from his time in the Marine Corps, a comment on his lean, unyielding frame during forced marches through unforgiving terrain. His face, framed by a neatly trimmed, gray-streaked beard, was a roadmap of his life. Creases around his eyes from years of scanning desert horizons, a faint scar above his eyebrow from a close call long since filed away. His leather vest, or kuta, was worn soft with time, adorned with the patches that told his story, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the Corps, and the fierce protective emblem of the Iron Sentinels MC. He was on his way to the clubhouse, a simple errand to drop off funds from a recent charity poker run. His mind was on the evening's plans, a barbecue with his club brothers, a rare moment of peace in a life that had often lacked it. He was a creature of observation, a habit beaten into him by years in recon, where noticing the out-of-place detail, a disturbed patch of earth, a glint of metal where none should be, was the difference between coming home and not. It was a skill that never truly switched off. It was this ingrained hyper-awareness that drew his eyes to the vehicle that had pulled up beside him. It was a nondescript white utility van, the kind that blended into the background of any city street. It was windowless in the back, its sides scuffed and dirty. But it was the front passenger seat that held his attention. A small boy sat there. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. His hair was a messy mop of blonde, and his face was pale, almost translucent, under the harsh sunlight. He wore a red t-shirt that was clearly several sizes too big, swallowing his small frame. His eyes, wide and blue, were fixed forward, but they weren't seeing the traffic. They were seeing something else entirely, something internal and terrifying. The driver was a man in his late 30s, with thinning hair and a pasty complexion. He was trying to look relaxed, one hand draped over the steering wheel, but his knuckles were white. A single bead of sweat traced a path down his temple, a stark detail in the air-conditioned cabin of the van. He kept glancing at the boy, quick, furtive movements that were more like a jailer checking on a prisoner than a father checking on his son. Sticks felt the first thrum of unease, a low-frequency hum beneath the rumble of his engine. It wasn't one thing, it was everything. It was the sum of a dozen tiny, discordant details. The boy wasn't in a booster seat, a legal requirement for a child his size. His shoes, cheap-looking sneakers, were untied, and one was dangling precariously off his heel. Kids were messy, sure, but this felt different. This felt like neglect. This felt like haste. He saw the boy's posture. He was rigid, his small shoulders hunched forward as if bracing for a blow. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't looking out the window at the big, loud motorcycle, wasn't asking 1,000 questions as any kid his age would be. He was unnaturally still, a statue of fear. Styx had seen that look before. He'd seen it in the eyes of civilians in war zones, the look of someone who had surrendered all control of their own fate. He knew what a scared kid looked like. He had nephews, and he'd been the first on scene at enough domestic calls during a brief, ill-fated attempt at a law enforcement career after the Marines. He knew the difference between a tantrum and terror. This was terror, pure, unvoiced, and absolute. The man in the driver's seat caught Styx looking. For a split second, their eyes met. The man's expression was a flicker of panic, quickly masked by a forced, ugly smile. He gave a little nod, a "what are you looking at" gesture that was meant to be intimidating, but only came across as desperate. The mask was slipping. Styx didn't react. He held the man's gaze for a beat longer, letting him know he was seen. The man looked away first, turning his attention back to the red light with an exaggerated stiffness. The unease in Styx's gut coiled into a cold, hard knot of certainty. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. The light, however, remained red. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Styx kept his gaze fixed forward, using his peripheral vision to watch the van. He could feel the tension radiating from it, a palpable thing that seemed to warp the air between them. He was cataloging everything: the license plate, a dent on the rear bumper, a faded landscaping company logo on the side that had been partially scraped off. And then it happened. Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, the boy, Leo, moved. He didn't turn his head. He didn't make a sound. He simply lifted his right hand from his lap, where it had been clenched into a tight fist. He slid it toward the open passenger window, his movements small and deliberate. His fingers were trembling. Styx's left hand was resting on his thigh, but his right was on the throttle, a habit of readiness. The boy's tiny fingers emerged from the window and, with a heartbreaking gentleness, came to rest on the back of Styx's black leather glove. The touch was not a curious pat. It was not the playful gesture of a child fascinated by a biker. It was a plea. The small fingers didn't press hard, but they clung there, a silent, desperate anchor in a sea of fear. Through the worn leather, Styx could feel the child's frantic pulse, a terrified bird trapped in a cage. In that instant, the world fell away. The sound of the traffic, the heat of the sun, the rumble of his own engine, it all vanished. There was only the feeling of those 5 small, trembling fingers on his hand. It was a signal flare in the dark, a message transmitted without a single word. "Help me." Styx's blood went cold. The professional calm he always maintained shattered, replaced by a surge of protective fury so intense it made his vision swim for a second. Every instinct, every bit of training, every fiber of his being screamed at him. Act, now. The traffic light chose that exact moment to turn green. The van's engine revved and it lurched forward, breaking the connection. The boy's hand was snatched away as the vehicle accelerated. For a horrifying second, Styx saw the boy's face in the side mirror, his eyes wide with a fresh wave of despair as he was pulled away from his only hope. The decision was not a decision at all. It was a reflex. There was no weighing of risks, no consideration for being wrong or causing a scene. There was only the ghost of a child's touch on his hand and the chilling certainty of what would happen if he did nothing. He twisted the throttle, and the Harley roared to life, a guttural snarl of defiance that cut through the afternoon quiet. He didn't follow. He surged forward, pulling directly alongside the van once more, his front wheel just ahead of the passenger door. He was a wall of black leather and chrome, an undeniable presence. He turned his head and locked eyes with the driver. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply pointed, a single, sharp, commanding gesture, toward the curb. "Pull over." Simultaneously with his left hand, he pulled his phone from the inner pocket of his vest. He hit the speed dial for 911, a number he hadn't had to call in years, and wedged the phone between his shoulder and his helmet. 911, what is your emergency? A calm female voice answered. This is Frank Kowalski, Styx said, his voice low and steady, belying the adrenaline coursing through him. I am on a black Harley-Davidson, eastbound on Maple Avenue, approaching the intersection with Oak. I am in pursuit of a white utility van, license plate 5 Kilo Bravo 297. I have reason to believe the driver has abducted the child in his passenger seat." The driver of the van saw the phone. He saw the biker's granite expression. He saw the unwavering command to pull over. Panic erupted across his face, raw and unfiltered. His gamble had failed. He had been seen. His reaction was pure desperation. He wrenched the steering wheel to the left, the van swerving violently into the oncoming lane. A horn blared as a sedan swerved to avoid a head-on collision. The van corrected, tires squealing, and shot forward, weaving recklessly through the moderate traffic. The situation had just escalated from a suspicion to an active public flight. "Suspect is fleeing," Stix reported coolly into the phone. "He's driving erratically. The child is not secured." The chase was on. Stix was one with his machine. Years of riding had made the Harley an extension of his own body. He leaned into the turns, his movements fluid and precise, a stark contrast to the lurching panic of the van ahead. He kept a safe distance, enough to be out of the van's blind spots, but close enough to never let it out of his sight. He was a shadow, a relentless sentinel who refused to let his quarry escape. "He's turning north on 4th Street, he relayed to the dispatcher, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "Heading toward the old industrial park." The driver, Marcus, was running scared. He was making mistakes. He was taking predictable turns, heading for a part of town he probably thought was deserted, a place to hide or, Stix thought with a fresh chill, a place to get rid of the witness in his passenger seat. "Multiple units are en route to your location," the dispatcher's voice crackled. "ETA is 2 minutes. Can you maintain visual?" "Affirmative," Stix grunted, opening the throttle to close the distance as the van sped through a yellow light. "He's not getting away." The wail of sirens began as a faint cry in the distance, growing steadily louder, a sound of approaching justice. Stix could see the van's driver glancing frantically in his rearview mirror, his panic escalating. He was trapped between the biker behind him and the police ahead. Stix saw the turn coming up on the left, the main access road into the industrial park. He knew the area. It was a labyrinth of warehouses and loading docks, but this particular road terminated in a dead end, blocked by a high chain-link fence. It was a perfect trap. "He's going to take the next left, into the warehouse district off 4th and River," Stix told the dispatcher. "It's a dead end. Box him in at the entrance." "Copy that. Units are being advised." As predicted, the van's brake lights flashed, and it made a sharp, squealing turn onto the access road. Stix followed, the wail of the sirens now deafeningly close. The van barreled down the straightaway, the dead-end fence growing larger in its windshield. The driver must have realized his mistake too late. He slammed on the brakes, the van skidding to a halt just feet from the fence, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel. For a moment there was silence, the abrupt end of the chase. Then, the world erupted in blue and red flashing lights. 2 police cruisers swarmed the entrance to the road, blocking the only exit. A third screeched to a halt directly behind the van. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Show me your hands! Get out of the vehicle, now!" Stix pulled his bike to the side, killed the engine, and kicked down the stand. He stayed back, letting the professionals do their work. His part was over. He watched as the driver's door was wrenched open. Marcus, the driver, made a last desperate move, reaching across the seat to grab Leo. But the officers were faster. An officer on the passenger side had already opened the door. "It's okay, buddy. We've got you," she said, her voice impossibly gentle amidst the shouting. She shielded the boy with her own body as other officers dragged Marcus from the van and forced him to the ground. He was cuffed and searched, his brief reign of terror over. The rescue was complete. The female officer gently lifted Leo from the passenger seat, wrapping him in a heavy police blanket despite the heat. The boy was shaking uncontrollably, his face streaked with silent tears. He clung to the officer as if she were the only solid thing in the universe. His eyes, wide and dazed, scanned the chaotic scene until they found what they were looking for. They found Stix. The biker stood by his Harley, his helmet now off, his hands resting on his hips. He simply watched, his heart pounding a heavy, slow rhythm against his ribs. The boy's gaze held his, an unspoken connection across the dusty lot. The danger was over. The child was safe. The immediate aftermath was a blur of professional activity. Paramedics arrived and began checking on Leo, speaking to him in soft, reassuring tones. More officers were securing the scene, their radios crackling with official jargon. The suspect, Marcus, was placed in the back of a cruiser, his face a mask of sullen defeat. A detective, a man with tired eyes and a rumpled suit who introduced himself as Miller, approached Styx. He took his statement, his pen scratching across a small notepad as Styx recounted the events, from the red light to the final stop. When he was finished, Miller stopped writing and just looked at him. "You're ex-military," Miller stated. It wasn't a question. "Marines," Styx confirmed. Miller nodded slowly. He glanced over at the ambulance where Leo was sitting, then at the patrol car holding Marcus. "We got a bolo about an hour ago. A boy matching his description was snatched from a park about 5 miles from where you first saw him. The suspect vehicle description was vague, a white van. Could have been 1,000 of them." He looked back at Styx, his expression one of weary respect. "Your instincts were spot on. My gut tells me you just saved this boy's life. We found rope and duct tape in the back of that van. This wasn't going to end well." Validation washed over Styx, a quiet relief. He wasn't a vigilante. He wasn't a meddling biker who'd gotten it wrong. He was just a man who had listened to a silent plea. "Glad I could help," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "You did more than help," Miller said, shaking his hand firmly. "You did a good thing, Mr. Kowalski, a very good thing." While they waited for the boy's parents to arrive, the female officer who had pulled Leo from the van walked him over towards Styx. The boy was still wrapped in the heavy blanket, and he was clutching a bottle of water. He seemed smaller now that the immediate danger had passed, more fragile. He stopped a few feet away, looking up at the towering figure in the leather vest. The top of his head barely reached Styx's belt buckle. "Thank you," Leo whispered, his voice hoarse from crying. Styx felt a lump form in his throat. He crouched down, the old leather of his pants creaking in protest, until he was at eye level with the boy. The whole world seemed to shrink to the space between them. "You were the brave one, Leo," he said, his own voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "You did the right thing, reaching out like that. That took real courage." Leo's eyes flickered down to the Iron Sentinel's patch on Styx's vest, the fierce eagle clutching a wrench and a piston. He reached out a small, hesitant hand, not with the frantic terror of before, but with a child's curiosity. He lightly touched the embroidered edge of the patch. "Are you a superhero?" Leo asked, his voice full of awe. Styx managed a small smile. "No, kid. Just a guy on a bike who was in the right place at the right time." A car suddenly screeched to a halt at the edge of the police tape, and a man and a woman burst out, their faces etched with frantic panic. "Leo!" the woman screamed, her voice breaking. The reunion was a tidal wave of emotion. Leo ran to them, and they enveloped him in a desperate, sobbing embrace, all three of them collapsing to their knees in a heap of tears and relief. Styx watched from a distance, feeling like an intruder on a moment so profoundly private. He quietly stood up, ready to slip away, to get back on his bike and melt back into the anonymity of the road. But before he could, Leo's father, his face still wet with tears, disentangled himself from his family and walked straight toward him. He was a man undone by terror and gratitude, his composure completely gone. He didn't say a word. He just threw his arms around Styx, pulling the big biker into a